Chapter 31. The Captive in the Open Cell. Ron was still struggling as they dragged him into the narrow stairwell behind the tapestry. Draco could see the tension in Ron's arms, bruised from how tightly he and Harry were holding on to keep him back from the threshold. "Let me go. I want to fight them," Ron shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "Ron, listen," Harry grunted, trying to maintain his grip. "Let go of me," Ron yelled, his frustration palpable. "Please, Ron, please," Hermione pleaded, seizing the fist that clutched his wand. "We can't go back out there. We need to find the snake. We need to kill Nagini." "I don't care. I want to do something. I want to kill Death Eaters." Ron's voice echoed down the hall. Draco, Harry, and Hermione quickly aimed their wands at the tapestry and began to seal off the entrance, but Ron continued to twist in their grasp. "We'll have to fight to get to the room of requirement," Hermione said, her voice trembling. Tears spilled from her eyes, and she wiped her face with her torn sleeve. "We will fight, but we can't lose sight of what we're supposed to be doing." Draco forced himself to agree, his lips numb as he spoke. He was barely aware of his own words, waves of shock still humming through him. The image of the Weasley twins lying in the wreckage of the barricade was seared into his mind. "Now you know," a small, blank voice echoed within him. Now they understood just how outmatched they truly were. As the entryway closed, Draco lowered the Elder Wand. He remembered how he had thirsted for this weapon back in the winter, genuinely believing that if he possessed it, he could show the Death Eaters who was in charge, but when the moment came, the wand hadn't transformed him into some legendary duelist. Instead, he had found himself dodging curse after curse, uncertain whether Protego or Parasalvus could even protect him. In those chaotic moments, he had been just like the others, trying to reinforce the barricade with nothing more than basic spells. Spells like Reparo and Duro floated through Draco's mind, reminding him of their reality, for teenagers armed with just enough defensive knowledge. Courtesy of teachers like Gilderoy Lockhart and Dolores Umbridge, they weren't soldiers, they were children, and in this fight, that made them vulnerable. "Do it, Harry," Hermione urged, her voice filled with urgency. "Look inside him." "Where is he?" Harry squeezed his eyes shut, and after a tense minute, he gasped, "He's in the Shrieking Shack. The snake's with him, and it's got some sort of magical protection around it." "What kind of protection?" Draco asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. Harry wiped a trickle of blood from his face. "I don't know." "An enchantment. It's like a glowing cage." Draco closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of their situation. The plan felt absurdly childish now. Opening a secret door in the room of requirement and pulling Nagini through? What had they been thinking? Of course, she would be shielded by the strongest protections Lord Voldemort could conjure. Nothing would distract the Dark Lord from his final Horcrux. "It's not good enough," he said, shaking his head. "We can't just burst into that place. He'll kill us all before we even figure out how to break the enchantment. It has to be good enough," Hermione insisted, desperation lacing her words. "It's our only plan." But as Draco wiped a scrape on his cheek and adjusted his robes, his gaze fell on the dark mark etched on his left forearm. Suddenly, an idea struck him like lightning. "It's not our only plan," he breathed. There was a secret way, a back door, something they hadn't considered. They didn't need to confront Voldemort directly, nor stand on the front lines watching their friends fall. They only needed to cast one spell. With renewed determination, he sprinted up the stairs. "We need to get to the head's office." "What?" Harry called, racing after him, the others close behind. "But, the snake, we can reach the snake without putting ourselves at risk, and we can command the Death Eaters to do whatever we want." "How?" Hermione asked, her curiosity piqued. "By using the Imperious Curse on Snape." They paused at the top of the passage, catching their breath. Draco turned to Ron, meeting his blue eyes, which were still filled with anger and sorrow. "You wanted a strategic advantage, Weasley. Everyone knows Snape is Voldemort's second in command. We can issue orders through him, divert their forces, and then set up a concentrated ambush." Draco glanced around, wondering if any of the Gryffindors would object to using the Imperious Curse, but none did. In the heat of battle, the lines between right and wrong had become blurred. Of course, Hermione said quietly. Then we'll send Snape to Voldemort with a basilisk fawn. Harry frowned, uncertainty creeping into his voice. But if we don't know how to break the protective enchantments on the snake? How can Snape? It doesn't matter what we know, Draco interrupted. If I command someone under the Imperious to break down a door, I don't need to provide the exact spell. They'll be compelled to find a way. If we instruct Snape to get past the enchantment, he'll have to try everything he knows. And if anyone knows how, Hermione added, I'm sure it's Snape. I thought you said the Imperious was really advanced, Harry said, skepticism lacing his tone. Draco raised the Elder Wand, its power radiating in his grip. I have this, it'll work, Potter. How can you be so sure? Because we have no other choice. A heavy silence settled over them. No one voiced their unspoken fear that killing Nagini would likely cost Snape his life. All right, Harry said finally. We need to hurry, we can't let them find Snape first. They emerged onto the 6th floor. Their allies were still stationed here, firing spells from the windows. As if the chaos outside hadn't shaken them, it felt surreal that they continued with their defensive strategy in the midst of such turmoil. But then, Draco spotted a familiar face, Cho-Chang, who halted her casting upon seeing them. Harry. What's going on? What happened to you four? They've broken into the castle, Harry replied, urgency in his voice. Tell everyone you can to get ready, they're on the lower floors for now, but they could be here any minute. Cho shouted, before dashing off to relay the urgent message. As word spread down the hall, Draco sprinted in the opposite direction alongside the others. The headmaster's office was halfway across the castle, but if they could reach it before the tide of Death Eaters surged to meet them, Snape would be the armor they needed. They raced past aerial responders launching off brooms through open windows, past Professor Sprout and a dozen students struggling to carry writhing venomous tentacula, and past Peeves, who bounced along cackling as he prepared a massive sack filled with dung bombs. Their luck ran out when they reached the Charms classroom. Ahead, screams and shouts erupted, the unmistakable sounds of battle. We're almost there. Harry panted. If we can just get past. His eyes widened as he spotted something through the nearest window. Get out of the way. He bellowed. Draco threw himself down the hall, barely escaping in time. An enormous boulder crashed through the castle wall, shaking the ancient stones of Hogwarts and causing them to crumble beneath Draco's feet. He grabbed a portrait frame on the wall, hoisting himself out of the way just as the floor gave way where he had just been standing. A cold wind howled through the newly opened hallway, exposing them to the elements. Draco glanced back to see Ron and Hermione on the other side of the widening chasm, separated from him and Harry. Jump. Harry shouted over the roaring wind. It's too far. Ron yelled back in desperation. Draco raised his wand, ready to conjure a bridge from one section of the floor to another, but Hermione screamed, Draco. Move. He looked up just in time to see a hand the size of a table descending toward him as a giant thrust his forearm into the castle's facade. Draco threw himself flat to avoid the massive fingers, scraping his palms on the stone floor. With determination, he aimed at the giant's eye, preparing to fight back against the overwhelming odds, fired a conjunctivitis curse from the Elder Wand, sending it hurtling toward the enormous, glazed surface of a giant's eye. The creature howled in agony, clutching its face and staggering back. Each step causing more stones to crumble from the already damaged floor, but as the giant recoiled, Draco's heart sank, something even more terrifying was approaching. Acromantulas were swarming up the side of a nearby tower, a writhing mass of hairy legs and bodies. From the darkness, the Ministry's airborne forces were zooming toward the fresh breach in the castle wall. Ron leaped back at the sight of the oncoming spiders, his voice ringing with urgency. Go. Get to the head's office, we'll find another way around. Where the cloak? Hermione shouted just before they sprinted off in opposite directions. As they ran, Harry followed Hermione's advice, pulling fistfuls of shimmering silvery fabric from his mokeskin pouch. He threw the cloak over both of them. The sounds of battle, which had been a distant echo, grew louder as they turned a corner, revealing clouds of dust and flashes of spell light. Incantations erupted from the chaos as Death Eaters clashed with the Order's allies. Draco recognized Amicus Caro engaged in combat with Mr. Weasley, while a pair of sisters from Azkaban hurled hexes at two masked figures hiding behind a suit of armor. With a shared determination, Draco and Harry dashed for it. The hallway was wide enough for them to slip beneath the cloak and dodge the dueling wizards, and with so many jets of light flying around, no one noticed them deflecting curses that came their way. At the end of the corridor, a group of students stood their ground against two Aurors. Padma Patil and Michael Corner were guarding a heavily bleeding Colin Creevey. "He's 16, Padma snarled, her anger palpable. "Wands down. Put your wands down." An Auror shrieked, unleashing a barrage of stunners toward the students. Harry felt a surge of fury, his steps faltering as he took in the scene. Draco pulled Harry forward by the arm, urgency etched across his face. They had to remain unnoticed, to avoid being followed. Moments later, they found themselves in the hallway where the gargoyle usually stood guard at the entrance to the head's office. But now, the gargoyle lay in shattered pieces. Debris scattered around the exposed doorway. They froze, shock coursing through them. Harry cursed under his breath. "Do you think Bellatrix came back here?" Draco examined the open entrance, his brow furrowed. "Can't be sure," he replied quietly. On one hand, Bellatrix had known the password and wouldn't have needed to destroy the gargoyle, but then again, when had his aunt ever refrained from wreaking havoc? His grip tightened around his wand. Part of him craved a confrontation with her. He wanted to face Bellatrix one-on-one, to avenge what she had done to Hermione and even settle the score for the way she had taunted his father. Of course, your son could never have been anything but weak. Bellatrix had cast a long shadow over his family for far too long. They slipped out from beneath the invisibility cloak, raising their wands in readiness. As they stepped into the dark, silent doorway, Draco felt the reassuring warmth of the Elder Wand in his hand. His aunt was one concern, but Snape was another matter entirely. Soon, he would need to cast the imperious curse on Severus Snape, who might no longer be bound or defenseless. They approached the door, which hung slightly ajar on its hinges. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness. "Ready?" Harry mouthed, and Draco nodded, lifting his wand. Just as they burst through the door, a dazzling silver shape materialized in the shadows of the head's office. Two shimmering shields sprang to life at the tips of their wands. In an instant, Draco recognized the form behind the translucent barriers, but just as quickly, his shield flickered and collapsed. There, standing beside the empty chair where they had once bound Snape, was the Silver Doe. The bindings lay slashed on the ground, and sprawled beside the chair was a large, burly figure, Vincent. Crabbe stood there, wandless, while a mix of shock and realization washed over Draco. He recalled the shimmering silvery mist that had appeared before Snape when they had stunned him in the Chamber of Secrets. His thoughts drifted to Pettigrew's hand, which had so recently caused such gruesome death. But of course, it had been the beginning of a Patronus, this Patronus. As the Silver Doe faded away, Severus Snape emerged from the shadows of a nearby bookcase. Neither Draco nor Harry lowered their wands. "It was you?" Harry's voice trembled. "You left us Dumbledore's bequests. You passed our message to McGonagall?" Draco's mind raced back to the previous summer, when he had seen Snape helping Dumbledore down the hall in Grimmauld Place. He had thought Snape's motives were complex, but now he realized that all his actions were bound by one simple truth. "You and Dumbledore planned this together," Draco asserted, his hand. "That curse was going to kill him anyway. So, you both orchestrated his death in a way that would serve a purpose." "Yes," Snape replied, his sibilant voice tinged with satisfaction, but when he looked at Draco, his expression twisted, as if he had tasted something bitter. Draco stiffened defensively, confused by the intensity of Snape's gaze, a bitterness that seemed reserved for Harry. Harry, meanwhile, was clearly grappling with something profound. He lowered his wand, and when he spoke, each word was a struggle. "Then help us." Snape remained silent. "If you're on our side, we need your help," Harry pressed urgently. There's something Dumbledore told us to do. We have to kill Voldemort's snake, but it's under a protection we don't know how to break. A flicker crossed Snape's dark eyes. And Harry caught it. So, Dumbledore told you about it? Snape asked immediately. How much did he explain? Very little, Potter, Snape replied, his voice low and steady. He mentioned only that there would come a time when Voldemort would keep Nagini close to him. He chose not to provide any further details. The snake is keeping Voldemort alive. It has to be killed, or he can't be killed, Harry stated, urgency creeping into his tone. Draco pulled a box from his pocket, and Harry took it, flicking the latch open to reveal a collection of basilisk fangs. And it needs to be done with one of these, Harry finished, determination shining in his eyes. Snape contemplated this new information. His gaze shifting from the fangs to Harry. In that moment, his expression shifted, shedding the malevolence that had characterized their interactions for 6 long years. It was as if he were observing Harry from behind an impenetrable barrier, a great distance separating them. Finally, Snape murmured, Dumbledore was also cavalier with my life. I'm not being cavalier with, Harry began, but Snape cut him off. Scarcely a minute's knowledge of my loyalties, and you wish to return me to the Dark Lord. You asked me to put myself in mortal danger with precious little information in return. You see that as my purpose. Yes, you are more like Dumbledore than even you dare to admit. Harry's expression turned defiant. Well, I notice you're still here. Dumbledore's not around to give you orders anymore. If you're not interested in ending the war, then why not just leave? In a sudden movement that made both Harry and Draco flinch, Snape drew his wand. But instead of attacking, he conjured a small crystal bottle and began extracting silvery strands of thought from his temple. Because, Potter, Snape said, maintaining that strange detachment, Dumbledore told me that when this moment arrived, and when the Dark Lord sought to protect Nagini, I must relay a message to you. That is why, as you so astutely recognize, I am still here. A message? What message? Harry pressed, eyes wide with curiosity and apprehension. Snape offered no reply, continuing to draw memories into the bottle. When it was full, he lingered for a moment before the desk, his gaze shifting first to the empty chair, then. The portrait of Dumbledore, dozing peacefully on the wall, captured Harry's attention for a long moment. Then, Snape strode purposefully toward Harry and Draco. There, he hissed, his tone now laced with cold intensity, devoid of any previous remoteness. He thrust a bottle into Harry's hand. Take it, Potter, Dumbledore's last message. If you're so eager to finish what he started, you might as well know why. With a flick of his wand, a basilisk fawn rose from the box in Harry's grasp. Wrapped itself in a black velvet sleeve, and landed in Snape's outstretched hand. He tucked it away before moving toward the window, his black cloak billowing dramatically behind him. Sir, Draco called out, urgency in his voice. Sir, wait. The Death Eaters are taking over the school. You could stop them. Snape hesitated at the window, his voice shaky as he replied, the Granger girl. She is alive? Draco was taken aback. Yes, he managed to say. Snape turned, not looking at Draco but locking eyes with Harry. In that moment, Draco witnessed a rare glimpse of pain etched across Snape's features. They held each other's gaze for what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, Snape thrust Crabbe's wand outward and hoisted himself through the window. He dropped silently into the night, as graceful as an owl in flight. Merlin's bloody, Ron exclaimed, diving for cover and knocking Hermione backward. It's Death Eaters all the way down that hall. We have to go back. What are we going to do? Hermione panted, spinning around in panic. We'll have to double back all the way to the grand staircase if we want to try another floor, and that's bound to be swarming with them too. We have to, Ron insisted. Otherwise, they'll cut us off. Hermione nodded, determination setting in. They dashed around the corner, sprinting through corridor after corridor until they burst into the grand staircase. The sounds of dueling created a deafening cacophony. The vast vertical space was alive with a storm of spells, as ghosts twisted and twirled, diving and dodging, desperate to avoid the chaos unfolding around them. Bolts of light erupted from the defenders of Hogwarts, illuminating the chaos. Peeves flung dung bombs in every direction, adding to the tumult. "Out! Out!" screamed a wild-eyed Professor Trelawney, her voice piercing through the din as steaming pots of tea and crystal balls tumbled downwards toward their unsuspecting targets. "There!" Hermione shouted, pointing to a section of the staircase. They leapt onto it, but they barely made it halfway to the next landing when Ron let out a horrified shout. On a nearby staircase, Fenrir Greyback was crouched over a fallen, twitching lavender-brown Obdurata. Hermione cried, aiming her wand at Greyback. He was blasted backward, but before he even hit the wall, he was charging back up the steps toward Ron and Hermione, his blood-smeared mouth twisted in a terrifying grin. Both of them cast spells at Greyback. But he deflected them effortlessly, his wand gripped like a hammer. One of the spells ricocheted back and struck Ron in the shoulder. He spun off balance toward the edge of the staircase. Hermione let out a small scream, grappling to pull Ron back from the brink, desperately trying not to glance down at the 6 stories of empty space below. In the struggle, her wand slipped from her sweaty fingers and clattered to the steps. "No!" she cried, her heart racing as Ron continued to teeter dangerously. She dove for her wand, but they had already reached the landing, and Greyback was charging onto their section of the staircase. He was larger than Hermione had imagined, the stench of blood washing over her in waves. He barreled up the steps toward her, and she knew she wouldn't reach her wand in time. Ron's hex went wild. Greyback was mere inches away. "No, you don't!" yelled another voice from behind her. A jet of blue light struck Greyback square in the face. Stunned, he fell backward, and Hermione watched, transfixed, as his limp body rolled down the steps. She could only gaze in disbelief as he toppled into open space and plummeted 70 feet. The sound of his impact was lost to her, drowned out by the screams echoing from below. Ron stood frozen, his mouth agape in shock as they hastily secured their wands and scrambled to the next landing. Hermione twisted around to see who had delivered the stunning blow and found Tonks hovering on a broom. Her expression grim. There was no hint of triumph on her face. It appeared as hollow as a mask mounted on a wall. She expertly navigated the staircase, weaving around obstacles, and landed beside them. Remus followed closely behind, looking less confident on his broom, stepping off with shaky ankles. "What are you two still doing here?" Tonks shouted over the clamor of countless portraits. "We've fallen back to the library." Hermione yelled back, ducking out of the grand staircase. "We need to get to the headmaster's office." "Right, well, we're not letting you wander off by yourselves again," Tonks replied decisively. "Remus, head's office?" Remus nodded. "There's a passage not many know about. Near the arithmancy classroom. This way." Meanwhile, Draco stood at the window, watching Snape's dark figure shrink as he flew over the grounds toward the Forbidden Forest. Why had Snape asked about Hermione? Draco felt a surge of anger as he recalled how Snape had stood by while Bellatrix tortured her earlier that night. He knew Snape must have witnessed countless acts of torture and murder on Voldemort's orders. How could he have watched it unfold without intervening? "Draco," Harry called, pulling him from his thoughts. Draco turned to see Harry setting the pensieve on Dumbledore's desk, pouring Snape's memories into it. Shimmering light radiated from its surface. He approached the desk. Exchanging a glance with Harry before both of them leaned in closer to the swirling memories. Moments later, they were spinning, falling, twisting into a sea of recollection. Draco landed hard on a patch of grass beside Harry. They both looked around, beneath a vast blue sky, and moments later, they saw him. Severus Snape, barely of Hogwarts age, crept up the lane of a factory town, swathed in an absurdly oversized coat. Draco watched as Snape lingered in the bushes, peering out at the sisters on the swing set. He saw Snape step into the open and exchange his first words with a Muggle-born girl named Lily Evans. It was clear, wasn't it? He knew what she was, and Draco observed as Snape returned from that ill-fated first encounter to a life of deprivation, starved not only for food but for affection and a sense of consequence. So, when Lily eventually turned her gaze towards Snape, softening as she spoke to him with curiosity rather than disdain. When she agreed that they were the same, Draco understood how that young Snape's life felt illuminated, and when Snape told Lily that her birth didn't matter, that it was how he felt that counted, the memory shimmered with that truth. You could see it all around them, in the way the trees swayed gently in the breeze. Then came Hogwarts, a new realm for Snape, where he sought recognition as a scrawny, sour-faced half-blood among well-loved purebloods. School presented an array of new experiences, from the approval of his teachers to the comfort of 3 square meals. Yet all these new elements revolved around a single, fixed point. Each humiliation inflicted by James Potter, Sirius Black, and their cronies, each word of approval from an older Slytherin, and every outstanding on every assignment, all of it orbited around one friendship. Lily Evans infused flavor into every mundane event of Snape's life, like salt in water. But Draco could see Snape's world shifting before his eyes, and he felt each stage deeply. It was as if he were watching his own life play out in reverse. He began to hear the Slytherins around Snape insistently declare that being seen with that mudblood girl was a humiliation, that it was best to extract what he wanted from her and then drop her. To avoid ostracization, Snape responded with cold indifference, pretending to understand what Lily truly was. To him, he had to pretend that she was merely a decoration in his life rather than its very essence. He felt he had no choice. He didn't want the other Slytherins to cast him aside. Lily didn't understand. How could she, with her bright spirit and carefree nature? But the other Slytherins made him feel special for the first time in his life. More than that, they made him feel powerful. Casting his first dark curse gave him a sense of control he had never known. Lily was everything to him, but she represented the opposite of that power. To love her was like free-falling through the air. And watching her turn toward James Potter, like a sunflower reaching for the sun, was simply unbearable. So, Draco watched as Severus grasped for anything that might offer him stability. His fingers found the dark arts, and he aligned himself with the other Slytherins, who reassured him that he was unique, that he had a place beside the most powerful wizard in history. All he needed to do was position himself firmly on the right side of the lines that were beginning to darken around him, separating purebloods from half-bloods from Muggle-borns. Draco witnessed this unfolding nightmare as Snape was hoisted upside down, his robes falling over his head, while Lily defended him. He saw him tumble back to the ground and utter words that could never be taken back. Spoken to the only person he had ever loved. For 20 years, Draco watched Snape's world shatter time and time again. He saw Snape, his body twisted with anguish, vow to protect Lily's son, the Granger girl. She's alive. Draco finally grasped the weight of that question, just as he understood the bitter way Snape had looked at him. Some part of Snape must loathe him for following a path that Snape had destroyed for himself. Then, at last, Snape and Dumbledore sat in the latter's office, circling the events of the previous 2 years. Draco overheard discussions about his own death sentence, the task Voldemort had set for him, and hearing about that task filled him with dread. The conversation being discussed by Dumbledore felt almost surreal. It wasn't until Nagini's name was mentioned that Draco abruptly remembered Snape had been meant to deliver a message to Harry, that this was the very purpose of this torrent of memories. He had to force his mind away from thoughts of Lily Potter, though even in this moment, her memory seemed to infuse the scene, threading through every aspect of Snape's thoughts. Draco struggled to focus on the 2 men speaking. If there comes a time, Dumbledore said, when Lord Voldemort stops sending that snake forth to do his bidding, but keeps it safe beside him under magical protection, then I think it will be safe to tell Harry. Tell him what? Snape interjected, his voice steady. Dumbledore's eyes closed tightly, and Draco felt an unsettling dryness in his mouth. Tell him that on the night Lord Voldemort tried to kill him, when Lily cast her own life between them as a shield, the killing curse rebounded upon Lord Voldemort. A fragment of his soul was blasted apart from the whole and latched itself onto the only living soul left in that collapsed building. Part of Lord Voldemort lives inside Harry, and that is what gives him the ability to speak with snakes, as well as a connection to Voldemort's mind that he has never fully understood. As long as that fragment of soul, unnoticed by Voldemort, remains attached to and protected by Harry, Lord Voldemort cannot die. So the boy must die. Snape asked, his tone surprisingly calm, and Voldemort himself must do it, Severus. That is essential. The two men continued their conversation, but Draco felt as if he had stopped hearing them altogether. Surely he must have misunderstood. Somewhere in the rush of memory, there had to be something that could soften what he had just heard, something that could change its meaning. He turned to look at Harry, who stood completely still, his green eyes like glass. Draco had heard countless people say how much Harry resembled his mother, and now he understood precisely how true that was. He looked back, grappling with the weight of the revelation. As Draco approached the desk, Snape conjured the Do Patronus. It landed softly in the office, its silver form swirling gracefully before him, even as the memory began to fade and shift. The final scenes played out in his mind, Snape orchestrating the Seven Potters plan, and ultimately, planting artifacts in the Potter cottage. Severus lowered himself to his knees before the ruined crib where Lily had died, sliding a small box beneath it. He remained there for what felt like an eternity, as if in prayer. Then, the scene dissolved into darkness. Draco found himself back on the floor of the head's office, swaying slightly, his legs unsteady. He stood in silence beside Harry, the distant sounds of battle swirling around them. Of course, the fight was still raging on, but the conversation with Dumbledore echoed in his ears. Suddenly, the clock on the wall began to strike midnight, jolting Draco back to reality. His grip tightened around the Elder Wand as he spun to face Harry, realizing in that instant what Harry intended to do, what he must do. Draco began to think of a shield charm, lifting the Elder Wand in preparation. But before he could act, Harry's full-body bind spell struck him. He flew backward, landing rigid as a board on the office floor. No, he thought desperately. He tried to voice his protest, but only a strangled noise escaped his clenched teeth. Harry knelt beside him, pale yet calm. An expression that filled Draco with a slow, creeping horror. No, you idiot, he thought, wishing he could shout, don't do it, undo the charm, we'll find another way. Haven't the four of us found another way for everything so far? Reaching into his moleskin pouch, Harry withdrew the snitch. I am about to die, he whispered to the tiny golden ball. It split open in his hand, revealing the shattered resurrection stone. Draco's heart raced, pounding harder and faster in response to the unfolding tragedy. As Harry gazed into the fragments of the resurrection stone, Draco felt an unsettling shift. It was as if he could see Harry slowly untethering from the world around him, intent on reuniting with those he had once longed to bring back to life. There, Harry murmured softly. He carefully slid the Elder Wand from Draco's stiff fingers, then retrieved the invisibility cloak from his pocket. Holding the Deathly Hallows united in his hands, he declared himself the Master of Death. I'm leaving this with you, he said, his voice steady but quiet, as he placed the Elder Wand on Dumbledore's desk, well out of Draco's reach. Since I'm giving myself up, I should be its final master, but I don't want to take any chances. A heavy silence enveloped the room. Finite incantatem, Draco thought, recalling Harry's wand, the one now resting on the desk. Finite incantatem. He struggled to move a finger, a toe, anything, but his body felt completely alien to him. Immobilized, Harry straightened up, already halfway beneath the cloak, a part of him slipping away. Do you remember first year? He asked suddenly, glancing back at Draco, how you challenged me to a midnight duel. Panic surged through Draco. There was no way to stop this. He would be forced to lie there and watch Harry Potter walk out of the room and into Voldemort's grasp. It's been a long time since then, Harry continued, a strange, distant smile on his face. Thanks for this year, Draco. He absently touched his forehead, then his chest, as if checking the very essence of his being before he departed. Tell Ron and Hermione, and Ginny. Tell everyone I love them, and goodbye. Draco fought to let out another strangled cry. The pain was excruciating, but he pushed out one scream after another. Yet, Harry was already stooping beneath the invisibility cloak, and then he was gone. You have fought valiantly. Lord Voldemort knows how to value bravery. Halfway up the cramped staircase, Ron, startled so violently that he nearly tripped over Tonks, Voldemort's voice echoed ominously, yet you have sustained heavy losses. If you continue to resist me, you will all die, one by one. I do not wish for this to happen. Every drop of magical blood spilled is a loss and a waste. Ignore it, Hermione gasped, a stitch throbbing in her side, the cut on her scalp leaking fresh blood. But there was no ignoring the voice, it reverberated around them as they climbed. Lord Voldemort is merciful. I command my forces to retreat immediately. You have 1 hour, dispose of your dead with dignity. Treat your injured. They halted in their tracks. Retreat? Tonks exclaimed. What's he up to? I speak now, Harry Potter, directly to you. You have allowed your friends to die for you rather than face me yourself. I shall wait for 1 hour in the Forbidden Forest. If, at the end of that hour, you have not come to me, have not surrendered, then the battle will resume. This time, I shall enter the fray myself, Harry Potter, and I will find you. I will punish every last man, woman, and child who has tried to hide you from me. 1 hour. Ron went as pale as a sheet. Despite the surge of fear coursing through her, Hermione said, Draco won't let him do it. This is good. If the Death Eaters have cleared out, we can get to the office more quickly. And indeed, within minutes, they burst into the hallway of the head's office. When they saw the gargoyle in ruins, they quickened their pace, racing toward the door and calling out Harry's and Draco's names. They rushed up the spiral staircase and into the head's office. Hermione's heart sank as she took in the scene. Draco and Vincent Crabbe lay motionless on the ground, Draco's eyes wide open. There was no sign of Harry or Snape. She hurried to Draco's side, finite incantatem. She cried. Draco had just managed to sit up when Remus, Tonks, and Ron began bombarding him with questions. Is Harry all right? Did you do it? Did you put the Imperius on Snape? Has Snape hurt Harry? Everyone, give him some space. Hermione snapped, waving her arms to clear the others away. Draco, are you all right? What did Snape do to you? It wasn't Snape, Draco replied, his voice hollow yet calm. It was Potter. What? With great effort, Draco pushed himself to his feet, leaning heavily against the head's desk. His eyes were closed, as if he were battling a headache, but he forced out several sentences about Snape that made Tonks sit down hard in one of the chairs. While Hermione's breath caught in her throat, Dumbledore knew, Remus whispered. Of course, and Lily. I remember, yes, in the first few years of school, we would occasionally see her with Severus. But I never knew that but Harry. Ron interjected urgently, where's Harry? You're too late, Draco said hoarsely. He left a quarter of an hour ago, he's gone.